3 years ago, I learned something strange about people. Some folks don't steal because they need something. They steal because they honestly believe nobody's going to stop them. And in my case, what disappeared wasn't money or tools or anything dramatic like that. It was 24 inches of my driveway. Yeah, 2 feet. Doesn't sound like much when you say it out loud. But when someone quietly takes something that's yours and then smiles like you're the one being unreasonable for noticing, somehow those 2 feet start feeling a whole lot bigger. I've lived in Maple Ridge, Colorado for almost 11 years now. Nothing fancy. Just a small brick house sitting at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac where everybody mostly minded their own business. The kind of place where people wave from across the street but couldn't tell you each other's birthdays. And honestly, I liked it that way. Back when I bought the place, I drove a big old Ford F-150 that barely squeezed into my driveway. I remember measuring everything twice before signing the papers because I didn't want to find out later that my truck stuck halfway into the street. 12 feet wide. Not huge, but enough. And after a while, you stop thinking about those things. Your home becomes like an old pair of boots. Comfortable, familiar, reliable. My old neighbor, Mr. Hensley, lived next door for decades. Quiet guy. Loved bird watching. We probably exchanged fewer than 100 words in 10 years, and somehow that worked perfectly. Then he moved to Arizona to be closer to his daughter, and the house sat empty for a while. And then one Monday morning, the parade started. First came the contractor vans, then dumpsters, then lumber stacked everywhere. By the end of the week, they had ripped off the front porch. I remember standing at my kitchen window with a coffee mug thinking, well, there goes my peaceful retirement. A few days later, I finally met the new owners. Their names were Bryce and Monica Calloway. Good-looking couple, probably early 40s. Successful, polished, the kind of people who somehow always looked like they had just stepped out of an HGTV commercial. Monica introduced herself first. Hi, neighbor. We're going to turn this place into something really special. Big smile. Bright white teeth. Friendly enough. I smiled back. Glad somebody's got more energy than I do. She laughed. Bryce chuckled too. And for a while I thought maybe we'd all get along just fine. And honestly, during those first couple months, I had no complaints. The noise was annoying, sure, but I worked from home and wore headphones most days anyway. Watching the renovation come together was actually kind of impressive. New windows, new siding, expanded landscaping. The place started looking like something straight out of a magazine. Then one morning, something felt wrong. Not bad exactly, just wrong. You know how sometimes you walk into a room and a picture frame is crooked, and your brain notices it before you consciously do? That's what this felt like. I was carrying my coffee outside when I stopped halfway down the driveway. There was a brand new stone border running between my driveway and their yard. Beautiful work, honestly. Gray stone. Perfect cuts. Very expensive looking. Except, it wasn't where it used to be. I stood there blinking for a second. Maybe I remembered wrong. Maybe the old edge had never been straight. Maybe I was just getting old. Lord knows that explanation gets more believable every year. Still, something deep in my gut whispered, no, something's off. So I set my coffee on the hood of my truck and went inside. My wife, Diane, looked up from her crossword puzzle. What did you forget? A tape measure. She raised an eyebrow. That's never a good sign. She wasn't wrong. I walked back outside and stretched the tape across the driveway. 10 feet. I frowned. Measured again. 10 feet. Slower this time. 10 feet. I just stood there. No anger. No shouting. No dramatic music playing in the background. Just me, staring at a line of pretty rocks that had somehow erased 2 feet of something I'd owned for over a decade. And the strange thing about losing 2 feet is that it doesn't sound like much. Until you're the one who lost it. Suddenly backing out felt tighter. Suddenly parking became awkward. Suddenly something that had always belonged to me felt like it needed permission. I stood there another minute, staring at that stone border, and that's when Bryce stepped outside. He waved. Morning. And I remember thinking, well, this conversation's either going to be really simple, or it's going to change everything. Bryce walked over wearing work gloves and carrying one of those giant insulated coffee mugs everybody seems to own these days. He looked relaxed, completely normal, like we were about to discuss football scores or the weather. Morning, he said. I pointed toward the new stone border. Hey, Bryce, I think there's a problem. That border's actually sitting on my driveway. He glanced over his shoulder, barely giving it a second. Oh, that? He said casually. Yeah, The previous owner told us that area was kind of shared. Shared. That word immediately rubbed me the wrong way. I looked at him. Shared. Yeah. Kinda unofficial. Our contractor measured everything, and this layout works a lot better. Makes the front look balanced. Balanced. Interesting choice of words. I kept my voice calm. It narrows my driveway. He shrugged. You can still fit your truck, right? And I swear, something shifted inside me right then. Not anger. Disappointment. Because that answer told me everything. He didn't care whether it was mine. He cared whether I would tolerate losing it. I nodded slowly. I'm gonna double-check the survey. He smiled. Sure, do whatever you need. Then he walked away, like the conversation was over. And that's when I realized this wasn't some misunderstanding. This was intentional. Back inside, Diane took one look at my face and immediately pushed her crossword aside. Oh, she said. How bad? They took 2 feet. She blinked. They what? I showed her the measurements. Her eyes widened. Bryce seems so nice. Yeah, I said quietly. That's what worries me. Because the truly difficult people rarely announce themselves. They smile. They wave. And they slowly test how much they can get away with. That night I dug through old files and eventually found the original paperwork from when we bought the house. And there it was. 12 feet. Clear as day. Just to remove any doubt, I contacted the county office and requested an official copy. 2 days later, the email arrived. Same answer. 12 feet. The stone border sat 24 inches inside my property. No gray area. No confusion. No shared anything. So I walked next door again. This time Monica answered. Her smile seemed a little tighter than before. Everything okay? I need to talk to Bryce. A minute later, he came outside. I handed him the survey. He glanced at it for maybe 3 seconds, then handed it back. Our contractor measured from the fence. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was ridiculous. The fence was installed 30 years ago, I said. Fences move. Property lines don't. He shrugged again. Look, we've put a lot of money into this design. There it was. Not right. Not ownership. Design. Appearance. Symmetry. His house looked prettier with part of my driveway. And somehow he thought that should matter to me. I folded the paper carefully. Pretty doesn't change property lines. For the first time, his smile disappeared. Neither of us said anything. Then he nodded. Do what you gotta do. Except this time. It didn't sound casual. It sounded like a challenge. 3 days later, licensed surveyor Raymond Keller pulled into my driveway. Raymond was probably pushing 70. Former Marine. White mustache. Didn't waste words. He reminded me of every high school football coach I'd ever had. He spent the whole afternoon measuring. Cross-checking. Double-checking. No opinions. Just facts. Then came the orange flags. Bright orange little markers running straight through that beautiful stone border like tiny spears. Honestly, it was almost poetic. Bryce came outside halfway through. Arms crossed. Already irritated. This seems excessive, don't you think? Raymond didn't even look up. But I did. No, I said calmly. I think it's accurate. Bryce exhaled sharply. You're escalating this. I smiled. No, I'm clarifying it. That landed harder than I expected. He stared at me for a few seconds. Then his eyes drifted toward the flags. You realize ripping this out ruins the symmetry. Symmetry. Again. I almost laughed. Symmetry doesn't change ownership. His jaw tightened. Without another word, he walked back inside. And honestly, that should have been enough. Most reasonable people would have fixed the mistake right there. But Bryce wasn't interested in being reasonable. He was interested in winning. Which is funny, because once I started paying closer attention to the renovation, I began noticing something else. One afternoon, while trimming the bushes, I found myself staring at their front porch. Beautiful porch. Too beautiful. Something about it looked larger than I remembered. At first I dismissed the thought. Then curiosity got the better of me. The county building permits were public information, so I looked them up. Approved extension. 6 feet. I grabbed my tape measure. 8 feet. I measured again. 8 feet. And I just stood there for a second. Because suddenly the driveway wasn't an isolated incident anymore. It was a pattern. 2 feet here. 2 feet there. Push a little. Hope nobody notices. I checked the setback regulations. Minimum 20 feet. Their porch sat 19 feet from the property line. 1 foot in violation. And unlike landscaping, that wasn't cosmetic. That was enforceable. I sat with that information for almost 2 days. Diane even caught me staring out the kitchen window one night. You've got that look again, she said. What look? The one that usually ends with somebody regretting something. I laughed. I don't want their porch gone. She nodded. But I want my driveway back. She leaned back in her chair. Then make sure you're doing this for the right reason. Funny thing about marriage. Sometimes your spouse says one sentence, and it echoes around in your head for days. Because she was right. This wasn't revenge. At least I hoped it wasn't. I simply wanted them to respect boundaries. And if they wouldn't do it voluntarily, then maybe life needed to teach the lesson for me. So I filed a formal request for a zoning compliance inspection. Nothing anonymous. Nothing dramatic. Just paperwork. A week later, a city inspector arrived. Clipboard. Measuring wheel. Neutral expression. The poor guy looked like he'd seen every neighborhood feud in America. From my window, I watched him measure the porch. Then measure it again. Then write something down. And even from 50 feet away, I could feel the atmosphere change. Because at that exact moment, this stopped being a disagreement between neighbors and became something official. And that same evening, just before sunset, there was a knock on my front door. I already knew who it was. But when I opened it, the man standing there wasn't the same Bryce Calloway I'd met 6 months earlier. Not even close. Not even close. Gone was the confident smile. Gone was the guy who casually talked about symmetry and curb appeal. Standing on my porch was a tired man with his hands shoved in his pockets and frustration written all over his face. No small talk. No fake friendliness. Just one question. Did you file that complaint? I leaned against the doorframe. Are you planning to move the stone border? His eyes narrowed. The porch issue is minor. I nodded. So is 2 feet of driveway. For a second, neither of us said anything. And honestly, we didn't have to. We both knew exactly what the other was saying. He exhaled heavily. This is ridiculous. Maybe it was. But it was also reality. And for the first time since all of this started, the balance had shifted. The next few days were strangely quiet. No contractors. No trucks. No loud music coming from next door. Just silence. The kind of silence that feels like something's waiting to happen. Then the city posted an official notice. From what I could gather, Bryce and Monica had 2 choices. Bring the porch into compliance, or apply for a variance. And that's when the interesting part appeared. Because variance requests involve neighboring property owners. Which meant they needed my approval. I didn't have to wonder how long it took Bryce to discover that. 3 evenings later, I was pretending to trim a hedge I'd already trimmed twice when I saw him walking across the yard. Different posture. Different energy. No confidence. No swagger. He stopped several feet away. Hey, he said quietly. I nodded. Hey. There was an awkward silence. Then he cleared his throat. I think the landscaping company may have made a mistake. I nearly laughed. Not because it was funny, but because hearing those words felt like watching someone slowly reverse a car after insisting they hadn't hit anything. Seems that way, I said. He nodded. We can fix it. No mention of shared property. No mention of symmetry. No mention of contractors. Just, we can fix it. I could almost hear Diane's voice in my head. Make sure you're doing this for the right reason. Bryce looked toward the driveway. We'll remove the stone, regrade everything, pour fresh concrete, and restore it. Restore it, I repeated. Funny how people's vocabulary changes when consequences show up. And the porch? I asked. He hesitated. We're applying for a variance. Then he looked uncomfortable. We need your signature. There it was. No more games. No more pretending. Just the truth. I crossed my arms. I'll sign. I watched relief hit his face instantly. Then I held up my hand. After the driveway is completely restored. His expression froze. Completely. Stone gone. Concrete fixed. Full 12 feet. He looked at me for several seconds. Really looked at me. And I think for the first time since he'd moved in, he finally understood something. I wasn't angry. I wasn't trying to destroy him. But I wasn't going to let him push me around either. Finally, he nodded. That's fair. Fair. Funny word. It always seems to arrive late. The next morning, the crews came back. Same trucks. Same workers. But a completely different atmosphere. No loud music. No rushing. No confidence. Just quiet. Piece by piece, they removed the beautiful stone border. And I remember thinking how strange it was. A week earlier it looked permanent. Now it looked like a mistake. Raymond's orange flags were still standing there like tiny referees, making sure nobody cheated. Fresh concrete went in. The edge was reset. 12 feet. Exactly. Nothing more. Nothing less. I walked outside while the concrete was drying and just stood there. Not because it looked better, Not because I'd won, but because it felt right. Because sometimes that's all people really want. Not extra, not revenge, just what belongs to them. That afternoon, Bryce walked over carrying paperwork. Different man. Not defeated. Just grounded. Everything's fixed. I can see that. He handed me the variance request. I sat down and read every page. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I wanted him to understand something. Things mattered now. Details mattered. Boundaries mattered. When I finished, I signed it and handed it back. He looked genuinely surprised. You still signed? I smiled. Bryce, I never wanted your porch. He blinked. What? I wanted my driveway. For the first time in months, he laughed. Not a fake laugh. A real one. Small, awkward, but real. Guess I deserved that. Probably. Then I pointed toward his house. Next time, measure from the right place. That earned another laugh. And just like that, it was over. The variance was approved a few weeks later. Their porch stayed. Honestly, it looked nice. It always had. That was never the problem. The problem was how they got there. But here's the part one still think about sometimes. Because life isn't a movie. There are no heroes. No villains. Just people. Was I justified? I think so. He took something that wasn't his. I made sure it came back. Simple enough. But did I use leverage when I found out about the porch? Absolutely. And maybe that's where things become complicated. Because there was a moment in all of this where it stopped being about concrete and property lines and started becoming personal. Maybe I wanted to prove something. Maybe I wanted to show I wasn't the easygoing guy people could quietly push aside. Maybe I wanted Bryce to feel what it was like when somebody else held the cards. I don't know. Even now, I honestly don't know. And maybe that's why this whole thing still sticks with me. Because people love clean endings. Good guy wins. Bad guy loses. Justice served. But real life doesn't work that way. Sometimes everyone learns something. Sometimes nobody walks away completely right. And sometimes the biggest arguments begin over the smallest measurements. So I'm curious, if you were in my shoes, would you have signed the variance? Would you have helped save the porch? Or would you have let them tear part of it down and deal with the consequences themselves? I really want to hear your answer because I know people are going to disagree on this one. And honestly, maybe that's what makes stories like these interesting. So let me know down in the comments. And if you've ever had neighbors who thought close enough was good enough, hit like, subscribe, and stick around. Because sometimes, the smallest lines end up teaching the biggest lessons.